Welcome to Tips, the Townsend Institute podcast series, a show produced by the Townsend Institute at Concordia University, Irvine. This podcast shares stories of leadership, coaching, and counseling experiences that have shaped the lives and careers of our guests, who then provide tips aimed toward helping listeners grow in both their personal and professional lives. I'm Dr. John Townsend, psychologist, organizational consultant, and author of over 30 books, including the New York Times best-selling Boundaries series. I'm also the founder of the Townsend Institute, and I'm excited to introduce your podcast hosts, Dr. Ashley Andrew and Dr. Gilbert Puget.
We've made it to March, a month dedicated to a green leprechaun, basketball brackets, the resurrection of Christ Jesus on Easter Sunday, as well as Women's History Month. This month, our episodes will feature interviews with women and their research and tips for professional and personal success. This week, I want to ask, how many of you are juggling multiple to-do lists, appointments, and deadlines, all while worrying that you're not able to give 100% to your various roles in life? That is oftentimes me, and I'm assuming at least a few of you as well. Today's guest, Pernille Spiers-Lopez, former CEO of IKEA North America, is no stranger to demands of both work life and home life.
That's right, Ashley. Pernille's Denmark roots and top executive role at IKEA, plus her roles as nonprofit board member, wife, and mother, had her trying to balance international travel with day-to-day operations on the home front. In this interview, she's candid about the areas she fell short and the solutions she used to find a life balance. She documents many of these in her book, Designing Your Life. And today, we're sure all of you will take away helpful tips on this one. Let's get started.
Here we are. It's great to have you here, Pernille. Thank you so much for joining us on the Townsend Institute podcast series. How are you doing today?
I'm doing just great. Terrific, actually.
Good. Well, we're excited to hear more about your experience. We're going to just jump right into it here. You have had a very exciting life, traveling across the globe, all kinds of different experiences here and there. Can you tell us a bit more about your background and what kind of led you to writing and publishing your book, Design Your Life?
Yeah, great. I actually grew up in Denmark, and I had a wonderful upbringing and lived out sort of like in the small town, kind of rural area. Been in just a beautiful place with a very supportive family. And I think one of the key things was actually that my dad always believed that I could do anything I wanted. I went to journalist school and realized that I don't think that was going to for me. So I had to come up with a new idea, and I loved design as well. And as I was always very adventurous, and I had some family that lived in America, and I wanted to just explore. And I decided to start my own business, and that was a way to move to America. So at the age of 23, I left everything, and I had a work permit, and I had a container of a random amount of Danish product design, moved to Florida where I had a couple of connections. So started my own business and started this adventure in Fort Lauderdale, and did that for 2 years and realized that I knew nothing. And after 2 years, I was out of money, out of energy, out of confidence, and just realized that, I better, call it quits and figure something else out. What was interesting is how much I learned from that experience. Though I learned really a lot how America works. I met a gentleman that said, if you ever need a job, come see me. And I called him up and learned that in America, you say a lot of things and you don't really mean it. So he was a little taken back by it. I was like, you said if I wanted a real job, call him.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm ready.
I'm ready. I started my career in retail at a little furniture chain in Miami, Florida, and started selling furniture for $5 an hour and get more and more into that and growing with them. I ended up learning a lot about importing furniture, just retail selling. And I got an opportunity to move to California with a company that was starting up. Who doesn't want to live in California when you come from Denmark? That's like your dream come through. Worked there for a couple of years, learned a lot about management, and very challenging, and from many different points, culture, the way they were operating. But I was lucky enough to meet my husband of 34 years there. So that was good. And then IKEA came to California in 1990. I started as a sales manager. Then my husband and I are now married. I had 2 little kids, and we get the opportunity for my dream to be a store manager. And so I moved to Pittsburgh. And there, of course, I was store manager, did not know what I was doing. 2 little kids. I was one of the only women in that kind of level job at IKEA. Yeah, my husband was a teacher and he didn't have a job. So we didn't look good for the staff when we got there. That's all I can say. And I was the 3rd store manager. So it was a little bit like they knew I was either going to make it successful or we would close. Fast forward, it did succeed. And I moved on to be HR manager for North America. And then I was offered to be president of IKEA North America. I did that for 9 years and led the biggest expansion IKEA had had at the time, really ever, in sort of the biggest and fastest. And after that, I became global HR manager. And after that, I was like, I actually think after the job as president of IKEA North America, I was ready to say, I think my season is over. But my boss, who had been incredibly supportive, he was the CEO of all of IKEA, asked if I would think about doing that HR global job. And I said, yes, I would, because I felt like I needed time to unwind and kind of like figure out how do I transition. And so, of course, it was a big job, but it was much more strategic and I wasn't in the weeds every day. So I felt like I really had that great opportunity to leave in a good way, and did 2 years of global HR manager, found a great successor. And in 2011, I was ready to just step back. And I remember we were in Stockholm, my husband, they had invited all the executive management team. We had a meeting and my husband was able to join us there. And I remember it was 4th of July was literally my own day of independence. So that was in 2011. And so then you asked, how did I come about the book? Actually, I would always travel in and out of Denmark, and a publisher came to me and asked if I would consider writing a book. And I'm like, no way. I am so in my head, I don't know what I would write about. What is there even to write about? And she's like, okay, but just consider it. So over a 6-month period, we kept on meeting. And then at some point she said, I will give you a ghostwriter and you decide what it would be about. And then I was like, huh. And so I accepted my ghostwriter. And I also wanted to actually write about my own story in a way that was relatable. But the woman from the publisher wanted me to write about how to support and kind of encourage other women to not be afraid of. In Denmark, you are sort of like, your pride is your kitchen. No, you have the most perfect kitchen and you put all this effort into it, but you don't really put effort into how would you like your life to be. So it was a little bit of a challenge to, give ourselves permission to design our best life. And I know that I was given so many different tools at IKEA. On one hand, I wanted to share that you can do it, but it's also not, you have to be willing to fail and you have to be willing to embrace some of the challenges, and you have to be courageous sometimes, and you have to fall and come back up and be vulnerable and know what you want. So I wanted that piece. And I also wanted the piece of sharing my tools, because at IKEA, we get so much support. And I feel like a lot of my friends and people I knew in my life, they didn't have any tools, So I felt like if they would read my book, at least they could start doing a little mapping of their life, or they could journal, or they could do a little mission statement, or I would provide all kinds of steps in in different aspects.
One thing that I really enjoyed about your book is the tools section, right? There's so many tools at the end. Hey, there's some journaling or this and that. You also talked a lot about giving up on perfectionism. Tell us a little bit why that has been so important to you as far as not being so worried about being perfect.
I feel that at some point I couldn't keep it up. Society, families, work, everybody puts pressure on for you to always do your best, no? And it's never good enough. It is just never good enough. So that's kind of like how your pressure is put on you. And if you don't at any point stop and say, wait a minute, this is not gonna work. There is really no good outcome of that kind of attitude. So if you keep on wanting to be perfect all the time, you are never letting yourself breathe or accept anything. So, and I wasn't aware of it until one time I had done this program for women when I was president, and I participated myself, and I sat in this setting with three other women that literally were working as hard as me. We all had kids, and we traveled a lot, and we were supposed to put this like order of priority, these cards. And I remember they were putting family first, and when it came to me, I could not put family first because it was self-actualization. No, it was like on the hierarchy of Maslow's hierarchy. It really was about that if I am not doing a job where I feel engaged and I'm having a purpose and all that, then if I'm not happy, then I can't be happy for everybody else. But I also then, by doing that, I said, how can I put family first? And then I'm living this life, no, of always, I mean, and my family is truly important, but I felt like that was the game changer, because that allowed the other women to breathe. And we ended up sitting there and just saying, holy moly, we are imperfect mothers. And we are imperfect. And it was such a release. And I had never thought about it until when that moment. And that was a liberating, freeing concept of, and who are we to think for a moment that we're perfect? No, because there is not such a thing. So it's in that humility and vulnerability and imperfection that we connect with each other. And here I had been living this like, oh, if they find out I'm not perfect as, as employee, as my husband, I mean, and everybody around you, of course, see you're not perfect.
Right.
But when you embrace that, it really is just liberating and freeing.
What a beautiful moment. I mean, we can just hear and sense the passion in your voice now, years later after having that turning point, and how important that was for you. And like you said, many of the other people in that room there back then. So, well, that kind of leads us to a next question then. After kind of you had that moment and you went on more of a quest to try to balance your life perhaps a little bit better, what advice would you give to those today that are in the middle?
I believe that we have to look at it as we have one life. No, so it's not work-life balance, it's life. And what are you prioritizing in your life? And I think owning that, and for me, I just added more and more and more and more, and I never stopped and looked at the totality. And I just kept on, adding more and more and running on all cylinders. And of course I can do more. And I kind of spun out of control, no? So I think that's easy to do because we want all of it all the time at all levels. And I think this idea of realizing that you have to prioritize. Yes, you can have it all, but you might need to not have it all at the same levels all the time. And I know for my husband and I think it has been super helpful to actually be, for the last, many years, he has had to lean in more than anything into working. And he has prioritized that the job he has takes a lot. I'll have my other things I'm going to be doing when you're working. And at the same time, there was times where I had to, when I was president, I needed him to help me out and say, I have to focus on work. I need help at home. So you have to kind of organize yourself around too, that there's a period of time where you're going to lean into work. And family, of course, they're going to be there, but you're going to be smart about how you use your time. But you got to be mindful of how you prioritize the life and why, and then own those decisions. No, I think that's the key. And if it's just a big blur and you're just overwhelmed 24/7, you are not good for yourself. You're not good for anybody around, and you don't really get further ahead. You just get more overwhelmed. Women, we are super good at multitasking, but it's also really not helpful sometimes, because that means we can't let anybody in. My husband, if he wants to take care of the kids and be with them in a way that is very present, he might not do the laundry or cook and do all these things I do. So really be able to let go, prioritize, and own your decisions.
Our students were really excited when we said we were going to interview you. And so some of them in our team building class, they said, in regards to IKEA, because that's a pretty big company, not just a mom and pop shop here. How did you create a culture that was scalable?
Fascinating, and in a lot of ways quite simple.
Okay.
And the reason it's simple is that IKEA, they developed after the first 10, 15 years, and it's a 90-year-old company, developed very strong, clear values. IKEA has a strong mission and a very, very vibrant culture. And how do you keep that alive? Well, it is literally integrated in everything. Everybody that you hire, you have to make sure that they actually are aligned with those values. So interviewing, in everything. We also spend a lot of time, or did spend a lot of time on including that and making it part of how you work, how you set up an office, how you interact with each other, leadership training, performance evaluation. The values go into everything, policies, how you travel, everything. It's just part of the values are not just over here, no? They are literally integrated in all of the work that's done at IKEA. So it's a how you do the work. And then interesting, because the Swedish values in Scandinavia are Swedish values. Outside of Sweden or outside Scandinavia, they are Scandinavian values, no? But then how do you align Scandinavian values with, China or Russia or Poland or Mexico, wherever you are? How do you then secure that no matter where you are, you have the IKEA values? Well, the IKEA values are human values, no? And there are some of them that are very specific to IKEA. And then every time you go into a new country, you have to look at what is that culture's values, what are the IKEA values, and how do we see they can actually work together, and then you work very much aligned that. Very interesting. I remember the guy, he was a Scottish man that became a head of supply chain in China. He had to build up a supply team, and he wanted to start, before he did anything else, to make sure that in China, where people didn't believe you could live the IKEA culture, he was going to show that we can do that. And he spent before he even started building, warehouses and anything, he says, let me get the team together and we're going to do this.
How did they react to that over there in China? I mean, did they push back a lot, or did people begin to embrace the IKEA culture?
Once they trusted that we actually meant what we said.
Yeah.
There are a lot of countries where people don't believe that you matter, that we care about you. We want to hear your opinion. We want you to tell us what you really believe. And we want you to grow and then bring other people along. But we are not having a top-down management hierarchy at IKEA. We trust you. Step up, be a leader, a servant leader, a leader that where you dare to be yourself, but you also got to allow other people to be themselves. And that was one of the hardest things because they're so used to you have to be a certain way. And it actually was the place in IKEA at the time where we had most female leaders, and they were business, like they were all the things that you want in a leader and delivering results. And they were just, so what does it require? It requires a lot of things, the clarity about the values and how it's sort of in everything you do. It shows up in, you got to do a lot of culture training. You got to have IKEA, culture ambassadors. And then you have to make sure that every person that is a leader lives that every day in every organization and get rid of the ones that cannot figure it out.
That's great.
You might have somebody that is really always delivering good business results, but their people are just, they can't lead in that kind of framework. They have to be the boss. They gotta, they want to get bigger cars, make more money, have more status. It's not going to work.
I just love that, Pernille. I love the way that you mentioned that with the values. It's not just organizational values, it's people values. And I love the way that you're talking about this because this really can apply to any organization out there. I mean, you're not even talking about the day-to-day operation of IKEA and what was built and what was sold and how it was manufactured and all of that. It starts with the values and it starts with the people well before even any of the products. And so this is so neat because it can relate to, the sporting industry or, the furniture industry or medical or you name it. It really just crosses all bounds.
And what I've learned is it is that sweet spot that the companies that really live long, are not the ones that make a big splash. They're the ones that have a really clear mission of what they do. They're very true to their core. Like IKEA, everybody knows what IKEA does. So it's not like they go and build houses. No, I mean, they might do a project, but that's not what their business. You stay in your lane, you get so good at it. And then you add it with the people aspect, the culture. That's really, I think, and then leaders that's them. They lead with their head and their heart. No, and you have a long-term perspective. No, because we're here on a mission to do something over and over again.
Well, that is so clear that you have led with your head and your heart for so many years. And I appreciate you being so open and honest about your humility and vulnerability that have been needed in your career. I mean, you even talk about that more in your book and stuff, that you didn't necessarily feel like you had the perfect background for some of these roles that you were put into, right? HR, CEO, like you said, former president of IKEA North America. I mean, these are huge roles. How did you personally get over the, kind of so-called imposter syndrome of, man, can I really do this?
Well, first of all, I mean, I did grow up with Pippi Longstocking as my hero, and her mantra was, I haven't done it before, so I'm sure I'm going to be good at it. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I've always, there's something about when something doesn't work, let it go. No, I mean, you try, but it can also be like, let me open another door. And I don't mean that just, but especially when you're younger, how the heck would you know what you're going to do the rest of your life? And if you do, and I'm not putting that down, but life is a mystery, and it's about being open to what's here now, And so when I became a journalist, I was like, yeah, that's not going to work. And I tried it. No, it's not like I just left. But after a while, I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to be like a feature writer for the next 20 years, because that's when yeah. So kept on kind of just being open to testing new things. And I absolutely have learned out of that failing actually is a good thing. Failing is where you learn and grow. So if you've never failed, you probably haven't really grown.
Yes.
And so going into my failure as a journalist, my failure in my business, I was like, okay, bring it on. What else can I be? And then also just going into new things where I feel like I have nothing to lose because I'm just going to have this like beginner's mindset.
Mm.
What am I here to learn? Because if I had done it before, then of course it comes with all these expectations. But if people know I haven't done it, then I can also be asking the right questions and allowing myself this openness. But what I learned as a store manager was ask the people that are doing the job, what do you need?
Mm.
And then I went to HR manager, and nobody had ever asked the HR managers, how do we get your job? What are the 10 things we need to take care of to make your life easier? And they come up with 10 things, and it was like nothing. No, it wasn't like something we couldn't do, but nobody had listened, and they just became very frustrated. And so there's this thing about just moving into it and saying, I trust that I'm here for a reason, but then also have this like mindset of I am okay not knowing. If you have not done this job, then allow 6 months to a year. There's been times where I am in a board meeting, or when I was with all this intimidation, I was always the only woman. I was always the one that, had a different point of view on things. And I really just questioned myself all the time until one day I'm like, I don't know if they don't like me. I don't know if it's because I'm the HR manager. I don't know if it's because I'm a woman. I don't know if it's because in IKEA, being Danish is not as sophisticated as being Swedish. So, I mean, I'm having all these questions. And at some point, I'm like, I'm just not going to worry about any of it. I'm just going to try to stand in me. And I am here because I deserve to be here. I have a role to play. And me sitting here and saying nothing is not serving myself or the company. So it's kind of like this self-pep talk. I deserve a seat at this table. So stop questioning that. And I think taking on challenging assignments, even if it's not a new job, just step into it and say, yeah, I'll do that, because it's a testing ground and then people see you and they're like, I want to work with her. She's not afraid. She's, inviting people in to be part of something that can be exciting.
I never heard that. So Danish is not as sophisticated as Swedish, or was it the other way around? Which way did you say?
The Swede. I mean, I have always, and I'm not the only one. No. There's a hierarchy in Scandinavia.
Really?
We're the smartest, and the Swedes think they're the smartest, but the Danes and the Norwegian were kind of like, yeah, but maybe not.
I'm learning more things that are new here. So, and within the Townsend Institute, one of the things we talk about, competence, character, and connection. You really leaned into the connection part. I mean, you certainly had the competence. You built that up, and you just had to show people, but people had to know you cared, that you were glad they were there. They were also dedicating all this time. Um, but some of our students also, they had this question after being a leader for quite a while, and in different roles and stuff. What's one aspect you have rethought regarding leadership?
A couple of different things. I think for sure, this whole thing about leading with your head and your heart. When I became HR manager, and really all along, I was always an advocate for business and people are intertwined. No, they're interlinked. You have no business if you don't have people, and people need the business. No, I mean, we need something to do. For me, that was like, it's been the consistent throughout. And what does it mean about people? No, it means that you actually care. And for me, I learned, like when I was talking about, like, why do I always be the one that stands in a meeting and say, well, what about the people? What about the women? What about the people that are not at the table? How do we move? How do we support? How do we, all of that? And it's because I truly have the heart. I care about every employee, and I know they're humans, and we are nobody if we don't have everybody. It doesn't matter if you're in the warehouse and the cash lanes, whatever it is. If you don't see people that way, I don't believe that you got any good business. And so for me, it's leadership is both. And I wish that I had been more clear about it, because then I wouldn't have struggled so much by why am I not fitting? Because they would have like, it's all about the numbers, Pernille. What are you going to do? How is it going to turn this into this? And I'd be like, well, and then I would just not always feel that confident in saying what I just said. And I also think that compassion is really an important leadership value. And I think it needs to be in everything. And I feel that that's a gift that I can give to others, give them permission to just be imperfect and lead with both heart and head. And it starts with yourself.
That is so wonderful, Pernille. I mean, you really just are speaking so much of what we value and hold true here in the Townsend Institute. From our very first class, our students work on a growth plan, and it's for professional and personal growth and development. So these ideas of compassion for yourself and for others, and humility and vulnerability, and really just we stress the whole relational approach, right? We were put here on earth by God to be in relation with others and to be in community, and that's both in the boardroom and outside of it. So we end all of our episodes of the Townsend Institute podcast series in the same way, and that's with one takeaway tip. Can you leave our listeners with one tip before we go?
I think it's that maybe it is that idea of Pippi Longstocking, no? Mm. You know, that I haven't done this before, but I think I can be good at it. This idea of stepping out of your comfort zone. And really, because if you don't step out of your comfort zone, somebody said, because I can't take credit for it, but it is in the discomfort life starts.
Yes.
And so if you step into that discomfort, learn to be comfortable with the uncomfortable, and knowing Pippi, she knew that it's going to be all right. We have so much that is untapped here. And if you don't start figuring out how to expand and test that, you're just going to live 10% of your, 5% of your capacity.
That is really true. I like the Pippi Longstocking analogy. That's fantastic. And I know you're doing great work now, Pernille. Can you tell us maybe where we can find out, your website or what you're working on now, how people can get involved with you?
Yeah, so I actually started Good Life Designed with my daughter, really when the book came out 10 years ago, and also my colleague Kine, who was my ghostwriter, and goodlifedesign.com is really our website. And we, I would encourage people to join our journaling sessions. I always say, if you never take anything, if there's one thing you can do for yourself to really always stay mentally healthy, it's journaling. And if you do that, so we have journaling. We also have an online course. We just came back from a retreat. We're starting to do retreats again, where we go through the Good Life Design core process, which is really all the tools, but in a process that really helps people to get to know themselves better.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I know a lot of our listeners will check that out. I'm going to look at it a little more deeply. This is fantastic. So thank you so much, Pernille, for being with us today and sharing some insights that I found really valuable. I think it's going to be great. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Take care.
It was a really pleasure meeting you guys, and hopefully I'll see you sometime.
If you enjoy the Townsend Institute podcast series, head to our website at cui.edu/Townsend to find out more about the certificates, bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees offered through Concordia University, Irvine. With programs in mental health counseling, executive coaching and consulting, and organizational leadership, we have a variety of faith-based programs dedicated to helping you fulfill your academic and professional goals. all the while furthering your competence, character, and connection. Again, that's cui.edu/Townsend.